We are back. You are chatting with John P. Today, we are going to be talking about watches that will lose value immediately after you purchase them at manufacturer retail price, the price that they're supposed to sell for in the store. Now, I know that this video might be kind of considered to be a little bit negative, but I think actually it's quite the opposite, because here at DelReyWatch.com, we work with so many collectors, and even on my Instagram, The Real John P, so many people reach out and genuinely they want to know, hey, is this a good deal? Is this a bad deal? Am I going to lose money on this? And while I don't think that you should only purchase watches that will increase in value or stay relatively tied towards the value of what you paid for it, I think many people are interested in that, especially as kind of the watch collecting community kinds of develops and people get into it. You know, maybe they want to try things out and they're not really sold on the model yet. So I can understand that component as well. So these brands here, I'm going to be telling you some specific examples and models that I think you should probably avoid if you're not looking to take a loss if you don't plan on keeping the watch. So something to consider. Also, speaking of Del Rey Watch, we have so many watches in stock, mostly pre-owned, I will say. We do have the new watch section where we do sell watches at pretty great discounts. So, you certainly can at least help to mitigate some of the loss there if you just have to have a new watch. But also, pre-owned watches is how I always recommend, and that's how I typically purchase my watches as well, because you let someone else take the hit for you. And watches, they last quite literally forever, at least in our lifetimes as people. Today on the wrist, Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39, now discontinued, red grape. I end up wearing this thing all the time now. Very simple, classic, understated, and that's what I like about it. So the first brand, and this is going to be a little bit shocking, I think, for some, considering how much Federico from Federico Talks Watches and I talk about this, but this is H. Moser. Now, this is not saying anything negatively about the brand, though I think they've done certain things to maybe cut some costs in some of the movement finishing, I would say, in some of the models today, like the Pioneer lineup, though, more than sufficient. What happens with H. Moser watches is the retail prices have just gone up to be in line with everything out there than compared to years ago when the brand was really, really just hitting the scene brand new. And so unfortunately, H. Moser watches do lose sometimes 30-40% off, maybe even a little bit more compared to the retail prices. Though that being said, they do float around gray market or pre-owned at pretty steep discounts, especially the ones we've had here. I had an H. Moser in my personal collection, and I could say certainly I paid significantly less than retail price, and also when I got rid of it, I sold it for significantly less than the retail price. And so this one hits close to home. I'll talk about my current views and opinions on H. Moser in another video, not saying anything negative about the brand totally, but certainly hits the list here of watches that will lose value if you paid retail price very quickly. Next, we have Grand Seiko. Now, before you jump to the conclusions and write in the comments section, the Grand Seiko fans, oh, I can't believe John P said all Grand Seikos lose value. No. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is Grand Seikos that don't have something unique or special, including the dial, typically lose a lot of value. Now, in recent times, it's difficult to find those models. People have been buying the Grand Seiko Seasons collection. They've been buying the Grand Seiko Snowflake, the blue version. So many different unique dialed and limited production Grand Seikos have come out in recent times, and that makes sense. So if you go and you check Watch Recon, or you go to eBay, you go to Chrono24, even here at Del Rey, some of these Grand Seikos sell for maybe even a little bit more than what you may have paid for them at a retail price or close to retail price from an authorized dealer. But largely, the watches that are pretty simple, we're talking the plain dial, automatic watches, for example, the ones that kind of compete with something like an Oyster Perpetual or a Datejust, these watches typically don't hold their value long term, and also the demand is not there compared to the more interesting models. People get into the Grand Seiko because they like that really beautiful, interesting, patterned or kind of embossed dial sometimes that they do with the Grand Seiko logo and some other things to kind of draw you in and give you something a little bit different that other brands are not doing, and that makes sense for that to be kind of the flagship theme of the Grand Seiko line and the product lineup. But when you look at some of the more watches that you can get from pretty much any brand, it's the value no longer is there. Not saying that they're bad watches, but the demand is not there compared to some of the other brands out there for that particular model. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Cannot wait to hear back on this one. Here's another one, Frederique Constant. The thing with Frederique Constant is, while the production quality and the value and the use of in-house movements have gone up the last 5 years, the demand hasn't really caught up with it, and they produce so many of them. I remember when this brand came out years ago, or at least when it started becoming more popular, at least when it became on my radar, maybe about 10 years ago, I was actually an authorized dealer. I saw this brand, and I thought, wow, this looks so much like a Vacheron. At that time, they were pretty much making watches that looked very similar to Patek, Vacheron. The logo at that time was very pronounced in the way that it looked so much like Vacheron, and the prices were much lower than they are today, though today they are at very attractive price points. But you can find, pretty much Audemars Piguet or that style of the Royal Oak type watch, Genta-esque watch. Frederique Constant sells something like that with a retail price of like $2,000. Sounds really great, but the fact is it's immediately worth about half of what you just paid for it. So once again, this is another brand that someone might buy on a whim or casually and say, hey, if I don't like it, I'll just sell it. Seems to be a common theme, especially with watch collectors and flippers and that whole thing that's kind of developing out there in the watch community. But this is a brand that I see people take pretty big losses comparatively. Now, $1,000 at a loss is much less than $5,000 at a loss compared to the next couple brands I'll probably tell you about here. But proportionately, it's about half of the price of what you paid for. So if you look at it from that perspective, and depending on where the budget is and the watch collecting experience, that could be a bit of a hit. And I see this one, unfortunately, happen to newer collectors a lot, especially when you go into the store and, they put Frederique Constant right next to Vacheron or something like that in a boutique, and, the salesperson kind of pairs it up and it looks similar and it feels a little bit similar. But unfortunately, you buy it and maybe it's not for you. That being said, I think the brand has done some really great things. I actually like their regatta or their yachting timer they have in their current lineup. I almost pulled the trigger on it myself, but I realized it's really not appropriate for anything that I do, and I probably wouldn't wear it too much. But very cool. I think they're doing some interesting things, but you will take a loss if you want to get out of one shortly after buying. Next, Bell & Ross. Now, I have mixed feelings on Bell & Ross. I think they do some very interesting things very well. I think their skull lineup, I think the BR92 and some of the others that they offer have become iconic for better or for worse. There seems to be kind of a gap between those that love that like military or kind of rugged, durable, inspired watches and those that think maybe it's not for them, maybe it doesn't deserve a spot in watch collecting community. Setting all that aside, unfortunately, for those that buy a Bell & Ross at retail price, with the exception of probably a couple of limited editions they've done in the past that had a bit of a hot streak for a while, they absolutely lose value so quickly. There's no other way to say it. There's no other way I can say this more politely, is you're going to take a bath on a Bell & Ross watch. I like some of the watches they have, the vintage collection, even the skull collections that they have. Very cool watches, interesting, and they're starting to even use some more avant-garde materials, kind of in the same vein as Hublot, which, foreshadowing, is the next brand I'll talk about. But unfortunately, if you buy a Bell & Ross, I probably would recommend keeping it. But if you like the watch and you buy what you like, which is what I always recommend, there should be no problem there. But if you're the guy that, for whatever reason, has not taken anyone else's advice and you still want to try to invest in watches, do not put Bell & Ross on your list. And lastly, we have Hublot. Hublot had a very strong run for a period of time. All the celebrities, the actors, the rappers, the musicians, if you were in the know for a period of time, whatever it was, 10, 11 years ago, you had an Hublot watch. Unfortunately, and I'm saying the word unfortunately a lot, but it's really unfortunately from the brand's perspective, Hublot has really gone by the wayside. That also being said, these watches are still fairly popular in certain places in the world. Now, I don't know if it's because of the advertising or if it's just maybe what's going on in the United States or other parts of the world haven't really trickled over into those markets, but Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, and parts of South and Latin America, Hublot is really still popular. You see it even on the road signs here in Miami. They're still advertising Hublot like it was 10 years ago, like it's the watch you should buy, like it's the hottest thing. That being said, you buy an Hublot watch at retail price, it's going to be really difficult to get rid of this. And I say it negatively, but I mean, it's difficult to actually sell the watch because someone has to want the watch. Most dealers are a little bit scared to stock Hublot watches because there's not a big demand for people trying to buy these watches in the pre-owned market. Though the boutiques say they do pretty well. The authorized dealers, they say pretty well. I've had, lengthy conversations at the Hublot boutique at Bal Harbour shops, and they may have since closed. I'm not sure. I haven't been there in a while. But at least at one point in time, there was an Hublot boutique at Bal Harbour, and they say they do very well with basically those people that are from those markets that come here and see a watch that they haven't, did not see in their hometown, or perhaps an impulse buy, expensive impulse buy, but they do it. And that's kind of the market I see them kind of developing into. So for watch collectors, those that kind of trade in the pre-owned market, not a great brand for you. Certainly, you'll lose a lot of money if you buy one of these Hublot watches and try to get out of it quickly. But if you buy one pre-owned, you'll get such a crazy price on it because the demand is very low. So if you see one at delraywatch.com, it's going to be an absolute low price because the demand is just so low for the watches. Not saying anything about the quality of the watches. I even like some of the designs. I can't wear most of them because I do have a 6.5-inch wrist. But for the right person, in the right style, and the right taste, I think you can pull it off, just so long as you get a great deal to begin with. What do you guys think? Are there any watches you had in your collection that maybe you were surprised that it increased in value? Or are there any watches that you were unfortunately shocked or a little bit disappointed that it didn't grow or you lost value on the watch? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And once again, not saying negatively anything about these brands. I like some watch models from all of these brands that I mentioned, but the reality is sometimes the numbers don't lie, and that's what we have here. Leave anything that you'd like to see in videos, comments, questions below. Thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P. Ciao.